le débat. The honourable member for Flamborough-Glanbrook.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It's an honour and privilege always to speak in this chamber, and I'd like to thank my colleague from Calgary Rocky Ridge for this motion. I believe that my colleague tabled this motion with the best of intentions and with great practicality. And I'd like to say up front that I'm profoundly disappointed by the tone of the last two speeches that were partisan in nature rather than realistic in what actually happens in our constituency office. All of the members of this House, once they have just a few months of experience, know that one of the number one areas, there might be some differences, but one of the number one areas that all of us deal with are constituents who have concerns with Canada Revenue Agency. And those concerns end up being very emotional for them. I think it's very emotional for anybody whenever there's concerns with their bank account and their pocketbook. And the member from Calgary Rocky Ridge was simply trying to do the best that he could in a motion to the Finance Committee to make sure that some of those concerns are addressed. And listen, in the multitude of the concerns that come into our constituency office, fortunately, Madam Speaker, with a couple of phone calls, sometimes with faxes, because we actually have to use the fax machine in order to communicate with Canada Revenue Agency. And my colleague over here seems to think we can't have any improvements. We're still using a fax machine to communicate with the Canada Revenue Agency. I think there's some improvements that we could do. But fortunately, most of the time with a couple of faxes and some phone calls, most of the situations are cleared up. However, as the honourable member from Calgary Rocky Ridge illustrated so well on April 18th with the stories of Irv from British Columbia, Doug from Alberta, and Janet from Ontario, there are times when the Canada Revenue Agency has wronged Canadians and stubbornly refuses to correct their errors, and even worse, causes significant financial and emotional strain on Canadian taxpayers. Yes, this doesn't happen often, but when you look at the details and circumstances of the stories illustrated by Irv, Doug, and Janet, I would argue that our goal should be that it shouldn't ever happen, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is why we have the Taxpayers Ombudsman and the Taxpayers Bill of Rights. Of that we can all agree, and for good reasons. What Motion 43 is seeking to do is simply to ask the Standing Committee of Finance to study ways to establish an enforceable duty of care from CRA to all Canadians by taking 5 very reasonable steps. Fair enough, you'd think. Madam Speaker, as Canada Day approaches, we know Canadians are mindful that we're all indeed very blessed and fortunate to live in this great land. It's a privilege that was hard-won by the courageous young women and men who defended our values in 2 world wars, Korea, Afghanistan, and many peacekeeping missions. A privilege that continues to be earned today by our women and men in uniform. Madam Speaker, with privileges of citizenship comes a duty to pay taxes so that our society can function in the caring, compassionate way that we all want it to function. I don't believe Canadians object to paying taxes when they believe they are fair and instituted democratically. And, Madam Speaker, when governments of any level respect the hard work that provided those tax dollars and spends the money wisely according to that respect. Fair is fair. Canadians are known around the world for fairness and compassion. Madam Speaker, that's why I take exception, along with my colleagues, to the comments made by the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue in debate in this motion on April 18th. The Parliamentary Secretary noted that $185 million investment in a telephone technology and easier-to-understand correspondence at CRA. Madam Speaker, we accept that as good, but we do not accept that as enough. Those are well-meaning and reasonable improvements, but they are not mutually exclusive with exploring ways that the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights can be enhanced with an enforceable duty of care. Further, the Parliamentary Secretary levelled a familiar accusation our way, stating that the Conservatives are smearing public servants again. And of course we heard it here again tonight, Madam Speaker. Well, that's just a bunch of balderdash. The vast majority of our federal officials are dedicated to serving Canadians. I have mentioned this on innumerable occasions, and so have my colleagues. We've also said all along that the vast majority of Canadians file and dutifully pay their taxes without incident. However, that does not preclude a study of continuous improvement. That's all we're asking for here. That's not anti-public servant, that's pro-taxpayer. Perhaps Most arrogantly, he said that this is a solution in search of a problem that doesn't exist. Well, Madam Speaker, I think he needs to visit some of our offices more often. Canadian taxpayers who have survived ordeals with CRA that have impacted their health, their finances, and their homes would disagree vehemently. Madam Speaker, I reject the notion that CRA or any other government body is beyond reproach, unable to make a mistake, or above the law. When someone is wronged, is it unreasonable to expect a dignified and expedient resolution? When many individual taxpayers, citizens and permanent residents, provide tens of thousands of dollars in revenue to the Government of Canada, shouldn't they expect more? Madam Speaker, let's look at what the honourable member from Calgary Rocky Ridge is asking the Standing Committee on Finance to do over the next 18 months and put it in perspective. All of us here have had some interaction with the healthcare system in Canada during the course of our lifetimes, and hopefully most here and the majority of Canadians were blessed not to have too much interaction with that system. While there are always concerns and issues, we know that the public healthcare system is a source of pride for Canadians. Madam Speaker, for the purposes of illustration, let me compare what we're asking for in this motion as if it were a critically ill patient in a Canadian hospital asking the same of the hospital's ombudsperson. We're asking for an enforceable duty of care between the CRA and individual taxpayers. Most hospitals already have such a code, and certainly the professionals who run them, the doctors and nurses, absolutely do. This is very reasonable. We're asking for the insertion of reasonable and necessary steps to avoid vexatious, malicious, and/or grossly negligent actions. In healthcare, this is called a good bedside manner, quality administration, and avoiding malpractice. These are all good reason things to do, especially when it's a matter of life and death. We're asking to empower the taxpayer's ombudsman. By comparison, in a healthcare setting, a patient ombudsman would be automatically respected and given a deference she or he is due. And in more serious situations where there's medical power of attorney, it's enforceable by law. We're asking for service matters to be dealt with in a timely manner. In medicine, time is always of the essence, and again, it's not unreasonable. These are just 4 comparisons, Madam Speaker. However, I believe all members can see the point. This is not a solution in search of a problem, as the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue so arrogantly called it. This is as reasonable a code for taxpayers as it is for patients, and we should aspire and embrace to this level of care. The Standing Committee on Finance would have 18 months to study best practices, consider the best approach, consult with experts, and that's entirely doable in 18 months. All we need is a political will to stand up for taxpayers. That is why, Madam Speaker, I urge all members who believe in servicing and representing the constituents who have come to see them in regards to CRA members, who believe in the best nature of Canadians that pay their taxes in support of the privilege and honour of citizenship, but who also believe in fairness for taxpayers, to vote yes to this motion and give the Standing Committee on Finance the mandate to support good customer service and accountability. That's all we're asking for, Madam Speaker. It's a reasonable request that this motion be approved by the House so that the Standing Committee can do the work and make good and reasonable improvements to the Canada Revenue Agency for all Canadians. Thank you very much.